grace are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sign of the Times. Welcome to a special edition of Signs of the Times. Normally, we're with you on Friday evenings. Last Friday, I couldn't be on at a football game to coach, and that didn't turn out too well for my knee. But even so, we're back with you, and we're doing a special Wednesday night episode tonight. I'm excited about tonight. We were determined to keep going with our theme, with our topic that we've been talking about, and hopefully you've had a wonderful day today. We hope that things are really working out, that you can see a turnaround in your life and your situation. Get excited, be excited. I don't know, wherever you're watching tonight, those watching from coast to coast, wherever you are with the wonderful art of modern technology, we're able to be seen all over the world. Thank you for joining us on our Facebook channel. Thank you for watching us on our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching us on Roku. Wherever you are around the world, I don't know where you are, but I tell you one thing, in the state of North Carolina, it was a beautiful, if Mr. Rogers were here, he'd say it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood here. Beautiful day. The only frustrating thing for me is with my knee banged up, it was an ideal opportunity to hit the golf course, and I couldn't do it because of this knee. But don't worry, I'm on the mend, I'm getting better, and I'm going to be out there, and I'm telling you, I'm ready to have some fun out there, and hopefully you do. Stay safe, mask up, wash your hands. I had my shot yesterday, and I was kind of nervous. Because I just seen the movie I Am Legend with Will Smith, and I was afraid. I didn't want to be walking around like a zombie, but I will trust in the Lord until I die. So I got my shot. Stay safe, my friends. Let's get to our show tonight. Let's bring our guest in, Dr. Stephen Gardner, PhD. He's been with us so much over the last 3 weeks, and he's given us so much information. But tonight, Dr. Gardner is going to dig into and show us some of his material. So this is going to be a very educating show. So get your pen ready, your paper ready, write down some things. Dr. Gardner said, when I told him I couldn't do Friday, he said, well, we still got to do it. And he said, let me check my schedule. And both of us were free tonight, and we're going to do it tonight. So we're going to welcome, thank you, Dr. Gardner, for joining us again. Welcome back. Thank you. And one thing I know, if it's beautiful in Carolina, I can imagine what it is out there in the Phoenix area.
Yeah, it's nice out here. I mean, we've been in the 80s this week, and a little windy today, but we still hit the 70 mark. So we're 73.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel really good right about this year. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I know I know it's nice out there. What we consider nice over here is just routine for you guys over there.
Yeah. Well, until the summer hits, and when the summer hits, well, you can throw an egg on the sidewalk and it'll fry. But this is all good though. It all comes with it.
Yeah. Well, I remember being out there one time during the summer, and I went in the store and I bought a candy bar. And when I came back out, the candy bar had actually, by the time I got to the car, the candy bar had melted. And someone said, how hot do you think it is? I said, well, it's it's probably about 80 something. And he said, no, it's 115, but it's dry heat.
Yeah, it's still an oven. It's still an oven.
But over here, 80 is going to be unbearable.
Yeah, because of
Humidity. Yes, sir. All right, let's get into it, man. I'm excited. Let's get into it. Doc, I want to see, because we're dealing with grief. We've been dealing with the longevity of grief. We've been dealing with situations where you lost a loved one, you had the funeral, you moved it. We talked about how long it takes to move the things out and all that. Let's talk about the night. Let's tie it into something, because I got my shot on Monday. And I got my first shot. And the reason I got a shot is because of this virus, and this virus that has taken the lives of so many people that I know.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we tie in, is it possible to tie in the COVID-19, this pandemic, with grief? Because a lot of people have lost loved ones through this pandemic. And I'll say this and I'll turn it over to you. I recently lost a couple of people in my life, as you know, as we talked about. And every time I mention to someone about someone that I lost, the first question they say is, "Oh, did they have COVID?"
Wow.
So there obviously there's a connection, but how do we deal with that connection between the pandemic and grief?
Well, I think that's a good segue, because, obviously COVID has a dynamic of its own, and that has created loss for everybody. Mm-hmm. Whether you have lost a person, there's a loss of lifestyle, there's a loss of normalcy, there's a loss of income, for a lot of places. So this is a global phenomenon. And this global phenomenon has challenged, just how we have grew up, just how we have navigated. And we that have known life to be pre-COVID, the COVID experience creates a different kind of loss, a disenfranchised loss, as it were, a different kind of loss. But now you tie that into maybe losing a loved one in the midst of it, or losing a loved one because of it, or when you're tying these two things, it becomes complex.
Okay.
And so, people like myself and other researchers and things of this sort are getting data in now, and really figuring out what are the best strategies, what are the best models, what are the best interventions that you can offer to people so that they can begin to navigate in a pandemic. We've always had to deal with grief because grief is part of life, but we never really had to deal with grief, in a pandemic, and that's new to everybody. Mm-hmm. So, as we move into tonight's topic, I wanted to say that the pandemic has complicated the normal grieving process.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Because it used to be, if you lost someone, the first thing that they would ask is, was it cancer? Was it cancer related? Mm-hmm. Especially a person in their 70s, 80s, you think, okay, is it cancer related? Now we've shifted from it being cancer related to, is it COVID?
Is it COVID? Mm-hmm. From COVID, from cancer to COVID, mm-hmm. And then the other thing that the pandemic has done, it has limited socialization. And so that's what folk need after they have really experienced something. They need to be able to socialize. Well, if the pandemic has prevented that, we got to mask up and you only have so many people.
Right.
We got funeral homes and stuff that are not even doing funerals.
Right.
Why? Because it's a public health issue.
Right.
And so people grieve appropriately.
And that's what I think Ms. Carter's statement is. Is it something different that's going on? Is it a different type of dynamic? Because now with COVID, we don't have the ability to even, although we know that they are transitioning, we're not able to actually say goodbye to them. With cancer, at least you could say goodbye. With heart condition, heart fit, whatever, it was still, but with even if they're just laying there and they squeeze my hand for the last time, whatever. But with COVID, you can't imagine the additional pain of having to be able to say goodbye by way of a cell phone.
Yeah, you or early on, what if the person can't get to a cell phone and they're on life support, or they got the ventilator on,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't get to them, and so they can't get to a phone, you can't get to them, and so early on there was no way to really, the person came into the ICU or the emergency room. If they had COVID, they put them in a wing, and that was it. And if they died in that wing, the last time you saw them is when you took them to the emergency room. And so now they're improving things and so on and so forth. So it's a moving target. But the idea is that it was problematic early on, and it's still a problem when it comes to grieving normally. You want to spend time with the person if you know it.
Mm-hmm.
There's been people that I've heard of stories where both the husband and the wife had COVID, and only one of them came out. The other one died. And so they both went into the hospital at the same time. Both of them stayed in the hospital, but one died while they're in the hospital because of COVID. So this pandemic has put a different perspective on how to grieve. Mm-hmm. And these are things we should not politicize, because you find that people trying to find some way they're going to politicize it, or they're going to attach some conspiracy theory to it. Look, people are dying. Right. People, and people are being exposed to this pandemic, and it's retarding or it's regressing how they would normally grieve. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, because I really want to open up the eyes of the audience to know not only the clinical aspect, but some of the non-clinical, and for those people of faith, some of the spiritual aspects that are associated with grieving in the midst of a pandemic.
All right, well, turn it loose, tell us what you have.
Okay, well, here we go. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully I can get it to work right this time. Can you see it?
No, sir.
Okay, let me escape and find out why you cannot see my screen. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
All right. Okay, I'm sure everybody can see it now, right?
There we go. Yes, sir.
So I'm going to talk about grief, the pandemic, and everyday folk. And I consider that we all are everyday folk. Talk about a few strategies for handling one of the most difficult times in our life. And we've already talked about how difficult it is during this time. Here's a quote by an unknown author that says, "Grief is love unfinished."
That's powerful.
Grief is love unfinished. Because when you've lost a loved one, you're unplugged from that person's presence, but your love remains plugged in to the reality and to the memory that you had with your loved one. Grief is love unfinished. So today's objectives, there's about 5 of them, and to explain the various kinds of grief and how it impacts our lives, to highlight how the pandemic has affected normal grieving, recognize why expressing grief is so vitally important for the griever. We're going to discuss the challenges of those grieving in the context of faith, and tips on how to help those who are grieving. So our purpose of today's presentation is to discuss the clinical, non-clinical, and spiritual aspects of grief. It is important to highlight the clinical and non-clinical aspects of grief first, and then place value on the spiritual aspects. Too often, people of faith discount anything that is not spiritual or religious to cope and resolve the common experiences of humanity. There's a tendency to limit the Bible to be the only answer to life's difficult experiences. And guess what? Grief is one of those experiences. So the first portion of today's presentation will feature the clinical aspects of grief, that is, the natural contributions of science. And the second portion of the presentation will be a biblical exposition, if we get a chance to get to it, on how to approach grief in the context of one's faith, where we're talking about some spiritual interventions. And at any time, anytime, Bishop, that you want me to pause and elaborate upon something,
okay, yeah,
just butt in, and then we'll pause and elaborate on it. So here are some clinical and non-clinical definitions, and the two terms are interchangeable. Grief and mourning are oftentimes interchangeable, but here are some specifics. The experience of one who has lost a loved one to death. That's what grief is. It is comprised of thoughts, feelings, behavior, and physiological changes that may vary in pattern and intensity over time. So, the varying of pattern or intensity. So sometimes people may, maybe at first may not feel an intense feeling towards their grief. They may feel like they're doing okay. Then all of a sudden, the 6th or the 9th month hits, and now they feel like they're like this cloud has dropped down upon them. So it's going to vary from individual to individual. In common grief terms, grief is internal, it is unique to the individual, and it's often controllable. Oh, it's often uncontrollable. So this internal feeling, you really can't control. It's like being on a roller coaster, or it's like getting an Uber, and the Uber driver is grief. You're a passenger, the door's locked, you've paid the fare, you can't get out, and you don't know how long it's going to be. And so, but as you work through the process of grief, you and grief are going to switch places. You're going to be behind the wheel of your life, but your memory, your grief is still going to be with you. In many cases, your grief will never go away, but the pain of the loss over time will minimize. Then we have the term called mourning. And this is the process that goes through, this is the process that one goes through in adapting to the death of a person. So it's a process of adaptation. Mourning in this sense is the external expression of loss. The actions are controllable and often influenced by culture. And there are just certain things that you may see that happen, as a person of color. You can go to a funeral and you have a different set of dynamics versus going to a person that's not a person of color.
Right.
And, it's cultural how we mourn. We have a tendency, our psychological makeup and emotional makeup is what they call, it's a higher verve. So we might be excited. We might scream. We might be more demonstrative. Where people that are non-people of color, those primarily of European descent or that aspect, may be more reserved, may calm. So there are dynamics that are cultural and that will come into play when a person expresses how they mourn.
Okay, that's interesting.
Okay, so here's some normal grief, Bishop. Normal grief also is referred to as uncomplicated grief. It encompasses a broad range of feelings, cognitions, physical sensations, and behavior changes that are common after every loss. So when we talk about feelings, we're talking about sadness. We're talking about anger. People are angry. Sometimes people are angry with themselves. Sometimes people are angry with God.
Now, Ms. Carter asks, is that suppressing your emotions?
Is there a suppressing of your
Is that suppressing your emotions?
When you are sad or a normal grief? Is that, I'm trying to understand the question.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll phrase it but that was the question. Yeah, she said, is that suppressing your emotions? You keep going. If she pops the question answer, explanation, we'll get to it.
Okay. So let me go back to anger. The one thing I don't do with people of faith, if they express anger towards God, I don't sit up there and judge them.
Okay. Which is what she did explain it. Is that suppressing your emotions when you show no emotion and no crying, etc.?
Oh, sometimes. And I can speak from a personal standpoint. I think I may have shared my story in the very beginning. And when I shared, I talked about the death of my mother. Now, she passed away, 3 days after my birthday, 3 days after I went into the military. And because I came from the kind of background where people, you got to be strong, men not supposed to cry. So I come back from the military, I had my uniform on. There I am going to the funeral. I didn't shed any tears.
Mm-hmm.
I kept them all bottled up. But so I suppressed them as she suggested. So suppressing one's grief is not grieving appropriately. And what happens when you suppress your grief, it doesn't go away. And sometimes it comes out in aberrant behavior. So I found myself getting into trouble until my sergeant sat down and explained to me the reason why I was acting the way I was acting was because I was grieving. And that helped give some context as to why my behavior was like that. And as I matured and I become to understand more about grief, I understood also that people do suppress their grief because why? They don't want to feel it, or they don't want to have, they feel they suppress it, it'll go away. The fact of the matter is, it's not going to go away. It's going to keep coming back until we come to the point and realize I've got to deal with grief. Mm-hmm. Grief is not an event or a time frame. It's a process that has to work through.
Okay. Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. Then we may go into the blame game. We start blaming people and we start feeling guilt and self-reproach, beating ourselves up. I wish I could have, would have, should have. Maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have done that. Or, not having that chance to have the kind of closure that you want. A lot of cases when your loved one is going to pass away and they're in the hospital room, you try to get as much family in so that during that time you can share with your family member that's transitioning how much you love them, things that you wanted to say. And this is where COVID has prevented that.
Right.
People are having to kind of internalize that, or they have to look at some other ways of expressing what was natural and what was normal.
Right.
So anxiety, obviously, loneliness, fatigue. Oh, fatigue. People wonder why they feel so tired after in the midst of grief, where you don't feel like you want to do anything, or you just wore out. It does have a physical impact. Helplessness, shock, yearning. Now here's one: yearning for that person's presence. But the other one is emancipation. This can also present itself, Bishop, in complicated relationships or abusive relationships, where this person was an abuser, and now they're dead, and so now you feel like, well, I'm no longer under that abuse. Even people that have been abused by someone will still grieve because that person that they love, even though they were an abuser, they still grieve. So emancipation is one of those feelings that's there. Relief, numbness.
Hmm.
You know, any questions on that, any of that before I go any further?
No, sir. This is good. I'm really I never even thought about that the part of the grief could be, fatigue.
Okay. Physical sensations. You know, hollowness, knots in the stomach. Oh, we all know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, tightness in the chest and throat. Oversensitivity to noise, a sense of depersonalization where nothing seems real. Shortness of breath, muscle weakness, lack of energy, or dry mouth. Sometimes what happens, Bishop, is that if our loved one has transitioned due to an illness, we may feel like we're getting the same thing that they got.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
You know, if they die from a heart attack, then I'm worried about when I get palpitations. Well, is it coming? Is it happening to me?
Right.
Or if they die from COVID and I have sniffles, do I have COVID and I come up COVID negative? You know, all these kind of things, sometimes we take on those same things. We experience a shortness of breath, or it just seems so depersonalized. Nothing seems to be real. Muscle weakness, again, lack of energy, and then dry mouth. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we go over to cognitions, now we're talking about disbelief. I can't believe it's happening. Or I'm confused. You know, or there's a preoccupation with this person's, with the memory of this person. You just can't seem to get them out of your mind. Or one of the common things, you can't seem to get out of your mind how they were in their last hours, especially if they've declined over time and they were robust and they were very healthy. And then all of a sudden, you know, as you begin to watch them decline, you might be preoccupied how they presented themselves physically in their latter days.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing about cognition is sense of presence. And so, you know, you might feel that person's presence. You know, I've heard this a lot, you know, where people say, well, you know, so-and-so appeared at my bedside, or I still feel that person's presence in my house, you know. But the thing about it is those types of manifestations are normal.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that your elevator doesn't go all the way to the top floor. It means that you're going through the normal expressions of grief. And that's why they call it grief, because it's a hodgepodge of all the things that we've talked about. Behaviors. This is common. Sleep disturbances. Maybe not get enough sleep at night. Eating disturbances. Distraction and absent-mindedness. Social withdrawal. Let's talk about absent-mindedness and distraction. Sometimes you just can't seem to get it together, brother. You know,
grieving because I must be grieving a lot because I still get absent.
I mean, this is normal. And when people
is this in addition to the crying and all of that?
It's all part of it. And because there are basically two types of grievers. You got the emotional griever, and then you got the person that grieves using their feelings. You have the person that grieves by keeping busy. And so, what happens is that sometimes when people are grieving and in a family, watch this, and the family has lost the same person, guess what? Everybody in that family is going to grieve that loss differently. And what happens is that people will start to judge how this person is not expressing their grief like they are. Here you are, you know, you expressing your grief through a lot of tears, you know, and so on and so forth. And this other person is real quiet. They're keeping things to themselves, and they're trying to work through it by keeping busy. families really don't understand that dynamic because they think if a person is grieving, that they're going to be crying. Or on the other hand, where you may have family members that are that may not be emotional grievers, but more to themselves, and then they have a family member that cries a lot and that upset a lot. You hear conversations and comments like this: "You should be over this by now.
Right.
You should have moved on from this. You need to get some help." I mean, all these kinds of things brings about confusion because now I'm not really free to express what I'm feeling and what I'm going through because my family doesn't understand or my friends do not understand.
What about the situation where the family or people say that you are the one that's grieving heavy, that the screams, the emotional part, you're the one that mistreated that person the most? And the person that really did all they could for them is the one that just says, she's gone.
Yeah, I think that, that comes probably more so from people of color that have made those kind of assessments. Mm-hmm. But I've seen, that to be a norm within any culture, is that there's a tendency to place some sort of judgment on a person being more crying more or more expressive with the grief. It doesn't matter if they're Black, white, Native American. It doesn't matter. People, when they see this, they think that, in our context, people, well, they grieve in that way because, or this, that they treated them bad. And it could be that they treated them bad. I'm not denying the fact they treated them bad, but the way they're expressing their grief is absolutely natural. It's absolutely normal. It used to, when I would go to the funeral home, and because one of my loved ones had passed away, and this is when I was a lot younger, I would be startled when I see somebody trying to climb in the casket. I mean, that really blew me away to see that. But that's how that person was reacting to the acknowledgement of that particular loss. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Give you a scenario, and you can expound if you want. Just a scenario. When I lost my mother back in December at the funeral, when it came time to the final viewing, and we're about to close the casket and say farewell to her, I was fine. My brother, who shows no emotions either, we were fine, and my sister was there. And when we got ready to close the top and everything, she turned to me and laid her head on my chest, and she started crying, which caused a tear to fall from my eye, which caused my brother to say, "Whoa, what's going on here? Why am I feeling this?" So can it be a contagious type of thing?
Sometimes, it can be a contagious type of thing. I think that what you're experiencing is common. Mm-hmm. I think that that's a hard thing about grief, that when we begin to talk about these things, what happens is that everybody starts to go through different aspects. Tell me, in how you were grieving, how did your siblings grieve? How did your other ones grieve during that same period of time with the loss of your mother?
All of us are just low key. There was no, all of us just know it was. I'm trying to express it there was no yelling, no screaming, no crying. It was, and part of it was because we talked a lot leading up to that about the fact that it was going to happen. We prepared one another. I talked to them about how it was the cycle of life. It's natural. Your parents go, then you go. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that applies to everyone, but for me, it helped me to prepare for it. Now, I'm sure had it just been some. Now, I'll tell you this, for my pastor father that just died a few weeks ago, it was the exact opposite. I wasn't expecting it. I got a phone call in the car, and the floodgates were gone. I mean, I just lost it because I wasn't expecting it, because he was someone. Go ahead.
No, I want to pick it. On the one hand, with your mom, you was expecting it, right?
Right. We were prepared for it.
You were prepared for it. So even at that time, you guys were going through what's called anticipatory grief. And you're preparing yourself for this person's transition. And so, you respond the best as you can. But when something catches us off guard, like it did, with Coach there, I mean, wow, it stuns us,
Right.
Because you didn't expect it. It just came out of nowhere, And so, in the way that you expressed your grief with your family members, towards your mom, and the way you express your grief toward Coach, it's normal. That's why they call it grief, because it's so out of sorts. One of the challenges that we have, Bishop, is this. In our culture, we are taught to, either get over stuff quickly, take a pill for it, not to process anything. We want to keep things in a hunky-dory society and the like, so where we can always feel upbeat and positive. But grieving is a normal aspect of life, and there are things that grow in us because of it. There are things that we learn about ourselves because of it. Is it a comfortable feeling? Is it something we want to go through? Do we want to hear all those cliches? No, we're not, because what we're dealing with is that person's absence. But as we mature and as we process our grief, we do have some takeaways. We got some things that we can draw from that, and we're going to talk about that.
Okay. Let's pop your screen back up. All right, there we go.
Okay, all right. So we've talked about some of these behaviors. We talked about social withdrawal. This is dreams of the deceased, avoiding reminders of the deceased. Some people I can't go in that room. Huh? That's the room that they died in. I can't go in that room, and so that becomes a problem. Or hearing the voice calling out to you. Restless and hyperactivity. Some people can't sleep. Or visiting places or carrying objects that remind the survivor of the deceased. Treasuring objects that belong to the deceased. All of these things are part of what is normal grief. Now, if somebody else is not doing that and they see you doing that, they might think of it differently, but it's really normal. Now, here's some things that everybody should know. Number one, everybody grieves differently, even if they lost the same person. Okay? There is no time frame on how long one should grieve. Third, grief is a conflict between the right brain and the left brain. Have you ever known that? Have you ever heard that before?
I have not heard that.
Basically, the right brain, and I don't know how you guys see it, but my right brain's over here. It's that part of ours that's more emotional, that's more intuitive, touchy-feely. That center is somewhere over here. Where the left brain is pragmatic. It's that side of that's logical and rational. And so grief is a conflict between the right brain and the left brain. Well, when we have a loss, it's considered a trauma. And so therefore, guess what side of the brain is going to light up and take over?
That emotional, right.
That emotion. And so guess what the left brain's trying to do? It's trying to fix it.
trying to say, like I did, it's the cycle of life.
Right. Right.
It's supposed to happen. It's okay.
It's supposed to happen.
Right.
Yeah. We try to fix it. We try to cope with it.
Right.
We're trying to manage our discomfort. And so sometimes we find out that works, and sometimes it doesn't work. So when it doesn't work, I tell people something very simple. that whenever this feeling of grief comes in upon you, the feeling of grief comes in like a wave, is to tell yourself what you just said, that what I'm feeling right now is supposed to happen. Because sometimes we're not allowing ourselves to give grief its proper place in our life, to give grief its proper place in our hearts, because we're trying to get away from the feelings that are associated with it.
Right. So, like someone told me, they said, well, it's okay. She's in a better place now. And my response was, I know she's in a better place, but I'm not.
Right. She's in a better place, but you're not. And that goes with the fourth point that I got up there. Well-meaning people will tell you dumb stuff.
Right.
They, what they say is not even resonating with you. You're dealing with the fact that she's not here. And fifthly, it is normal for other people to be uncomfortable with your grief. Now, other people, Bishop, are going to be uncomfortable with how you're grieving. So we can't expect everybody to be as accepting. One of the things that I like to do, especially if I have the opportunity of working with a family, I try to meet with all the members of that family that are available so that I can talk to them, tell them what they can expect from each other, tell them what they can expect from themselves, and encourage them to be empathetic and to allow each other to grieve appropriately, or allow each other to grieve the way that they feel like they should grieve. So it is normal for people to be uncomfortable with your grief. Then here's some challenges that I've run into. Challenge of grieving in the pandemic. First, the pandemic and social distance measures has limited how friends and family interact. I think we talked about this in the beginning, didn't we?
Yes.
Second, those who are dying from the virus are dying alone, without any family or friends at their bedside. Third, many funeral homes are placing restrictions on how families can conduct memorials and celebrations of life for their loved ones. And lastly, all of the factors associated with the pandemic, grieving naturally and normally is abrupt. Any questions or comments on that before we go any further? How are we doing on time, sir?
Good. We got about 10 minutes and we'll.
Okay. All right. So here are some tasks, and these tasks were created by a doctor by the name of Wolfeld, or Warden's task. So he has, in fact, I think I got his book here. Yeah, it's by a gentleman by the name of J. William Warden, and he talks about the 4 tasks of mourning.
Okay.
And the 4 tasks of mourning, the first task that people work through is accepting the reality of the loss. And in my opinion, usually people, are able to navigate through this reality very quickly. It's not always the case, but in some cases, people get through this or are able to accept the reality sooner than later. But where the challenge has been is number 2 and number 3. Working through the pain of the grief while caring for oneself. Now, working through the pain of the grief is that roller coaster, trying to deal with all those emotions that go along with it. But notice, while caring for oneself. Now, that's important, Bishop, because when we have encountered a loss, we are not 100%. Right. So we're operating at 75 or 80% of our psychological, our cognitive, our physiological perspective, as it were. And so what's going to happen is that, one thing that's going to help us heal from grief, do you know what the magic word is? Self-care.
Okay.
If we're not making any investments into caring for oneself, if I've been burning the candle at both ends because I've been not only lover and or son and also caregiver, if I've been burning the candle at both ends while caring for my loved one, I don't have any more candle left. So I'm going to have to care for myself. And so if this loss has been so traumatic for you, whether you were a caregiver or not, guess what? We have to make investments. We have to, as it were, we have to engage ourselves in some self-caring activities. And I can talk about them at a different time, but for the sake of our time, I just want to kind of breeze through some of this. The third thing that people struggle with is adjusting to a new environment. And if it's a spouse that has lost their husband, one of the things that spouse has lost is a sense of identity. Or if it's a spouse has lost his wife, they still have lost a sense of their identity. Because if they've been married for a long period of time, or even a short period of time, their identity is wrapped up in that marriage. And so when that person is gone, they ask these kind of questions. Who am I now? So they have to adjust to their absence, but they also have to adjust to who they are becoming, and they feel lost, and they're looking for ways to draw meaning. And so fourthly, we could, the fourth task is reinvesting in the future while honoring the past.
Okay.
You gotta, make some deposits in the future, but at the same time, you're not going to let go of whom you love. So you want to honor.
Right.
I call it building a plane while it's flying, because sometimes it's easier said than done. How do I move forward and still honor them at the same time? It's
right.
No one's trying to say any of this stuff is magical. It's the reality that sometimes it's uncomfortable and sometimes it's very painful, but it's a process, that we actually are able to navigate through if we do all the right things. So this brings us to this part of the session called Grieving in the Context of Faith. And I don't know if you want to deal with that today, or we can come back at a different time in the future and really talk about it. But there is a few more slides that really deal with this. So you tell me.
Maybe we should just let this soak in, and we come back and just pick right up with because this is not going to be fast, because we'll really get into it and open some can of worms or whatever, because we can talk about in the context of faith. I think this will be I think that grieving in the context of faith will be an entire episode on a show on its own.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah.
I'm not. What kind of comments have we been getting from the people? Anything that anyone's saying is validating or?
Yeah, Miss Carter she just posted a comment saying that not only spouses, but when children who lost parents.
I want to talk about that too. And because children grieve, and if we don't, we got to let them grieve the way they do, and sometimes, here's the thing, sometimes the church should be comfortable in referring its members, or you as a friend should be comfortable in referring maybe a family member to a specialist that deals with child grief.
Right.
Because
now, wait a minute. Now, not only, you're right. And not only child grief for parents, but us 40-year-olds that lost a parent.
Us 40-year-olds that lost parents, because you're going to grieve just like that 8-year-old.
Right.
And you're not going to be yourself, and so we should have professional help. And there's a lot of free professional help that's in communities. Some are done through nonprofits and so on and so forth. And then others are paid. Obviously, if you got the kind of health insurance, you can probably get a referral from your PCP over to someone that's a grief specialist or a grief therapist, as it were. I believe that God has designed, and I'm getting religious here, so I'm getting religious on you, but because I'm a man of faith, so I want to talk about it just for a tidbit. I believe that God has designed. He created science, and I believe there's some of the answers to our illnesses in science.
Okay.
He given us his word. He's also given us science. I believe the two can coexist.
Right. That's what I said. I was telling someone about this shot. I said, I trust God, but I trust science, but I trust God over the science.
Right. Well, I get my second shot tomorrow.
All right.
And that's why I didn't schedule you for Friday.
Yeah, you may be a little bit under the weather, which is a good thing. Which is a good thing because your body's building up. Yeah.
So that's all good, man. So yeah, I know what that first round I was out, but it only lasted 48 hours. By Saturday, man, I was back to my normal self. So those are kind of things that I think is important for us. We shouldn't be afraid to do those kind of things either. We can't let our religious tomfoolery or even conspiracy theories, to dissuade us from doing those kind of things. Because we obey science all the time. Every time you get up in the morning and you pick up a toothbrush and toothpaste, you are obeying science.
That's true. You're right.
And don't use a toothbrush if and don't use toothpaste. Somebody is going to inform you that you are scientifically deficient. I'm just messing, but you get the point.
Yes, sir. And that's a topic. Again, that's why I said we'll wait until next week, because science versus religion.
There we go.
That's a long debate. It's one that science acknowledged. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
All right, Doc. Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate you taking time out for us on tonight. Again, as always, man, means a lot to me that you're able to help so many people. And from what we're gathering, if you help one, the songwriter said, if I could just help somebody.
If I can just help somebody, yeah.
And I believe you've helped someone tonight with this conversation, and I'm excited because you have so much more information.
Great, sir.
Yeah, we're not just hung up on emotions; it's information. I said this. I was talking to someone. They asked me. They said, "What are the best? How do you define a good message or a good sermon?" And I said, "Well, there are three parts. There's information, there's motivation, and there's inspiration. The information is the steak. The motivation is how to apply it. So that's cutting it up into chunks so you can apply it. The inspiration is the gravy."
Well,
don't start nothing.
I'm about to go give me something.
And unfortunately, I think in our culture, we're hung up on the gravy.
We hung up on the gravy.
On the hoop. And we realize this, I don't come to your house for a bowl of gravy. I want some meat, some substance, some teaching. And what you've given us tonight is good, solid teaching that's going to help us. Not just the gravy of saying it's going to be all right.
Wow.
Right. So, Go, bro. I'll see you next week. We'll get all right. Thank you, my brother.
All right. Fist bump.
All right. Where's the camera? I can't find the camera. There it is. All right. All right. I'll see you, man. Want to thank Dr. Gardner for joining us tonight. This was just a wonderful time, wonderful show tonight. Again, full of information, full of motivation. He was telling us how to apply it, and now the inspiration, is something that we are excited about, and I'm excited about going forward, that we're going to be able to take our grief. We're going to normalize it. that it is okay. You are not strange because you cry. You're not strange because you grieve. You're not strange because you say that that person is there. You're not strange because you miss them. You're not strange because you feel a knot in the pit of your stomach. You're not strange. It's just a normal part of life. And so I'm so grateful to have good friends like Dr. Gardner who will come on and teach us these things to help us. So I want to encourage you, those that have been, you're struggling with it, hang in there. We're going to keep doing this until we're satisfied that you have all of the knowledge and information that you need to survive. We got to come back every week. We're going to keep doing it for you and for me and for us. All right. I want to challenge you to enjoy your rest of the week. I want to challenge you to love someone. I want to challenge you to love on someone. And I want to challenge you to look in the mirror before you go to bed tonight. Look yourself right in the eyes. I want to challenge you to do that. Look yourself in the eyes and ask yourself, did I do something to work toward my purpose and destiny in life today? Or did I simply waste another day? Don't waste another day. We'll see you next week right here on Sign of the Times. I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And we'll see you next week on what I think is the best show on social media, Sign of the Times. See you.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna